Hello, Brain Scratchers. It's me, John Lorden. I hope each and every one of you had a great week, and thank you for joining me here at the end of the week with another edition of Brain Scratch. Now, you might be a little confused by the images. Are we doing a Brain Scratch about Rush? Well, in a way, kind of. In case you don't know Rush, they've been around a while, and I imagine that there are some of you younger folks out there who might not know who Rush is. They are a rock band, kind of, I guess you would consider them progressive rock band a little bit. I believe they're Canadian, if I remember right. I think there is 3 primary members. There they are. And essentially, there is this lady that I was fortunate enough to get in contact with. She actually asked me to come on to one of her podcast shows and be interviewed, and her name is Solaris BlueRaven. Here are some photos of her. And once she originally contacted me, I decided, well, I better find out a little bit about her and listen to the podcast and, make sure it's something that I want to be a part of. And I went and viewed a video. Here's a picture of it right here, actually, where she was describing some type of operations that sounded a lot like they were related to MK Ultra. And I'm sure you Brain Scratch fans have seen that I've already done an episode on MK Ultra. Believe it or not, I've done a few episodes trying to lead up to this episode because I wanted to be better versed in terms of the truths and myths and everything around these types of accusations. So the MK Ultra episode is a good primer for this one if you haven't seen it. Also, believe it or not, the Smart Meter episode is a good primer for this one if you haven't seen it. And basically, the accusations come from Solaris, and she believes that, I believe it's in 2004, that there was some type of event where her electromagnetic signal, her body's electromagnetic signal, was tagged and now allowed communications to be coming at her. Literally almost like you're hearing a voice in your head, but you know it's not your own. Now, I know first reaction for a lot of people is, wow, that sounds like some type of emotional disorder or psychosis happening of some kind. Is she possibly schizophrenic or something like that? I mean, there's all kinds of ideas that start popping up when you kind of approach this subject, and that's why I've really taken so long and really tried to get myself well versed and ready for approaching this subject. However, if you watch the whole video, by the time you get to the end of it, there is some reason to believe that maybe there is something that has actually been done to this woman. Now, it's interesting, as a profession, she actually also does some things related to surveillance. So she's already kind of the mindset. She's very aware of surveillance technologies, and from that perspective, all of her story feels very stable, very relatable, and believable. She even went as far as contacting the head of security for Rush, and she specifically thought that the drummer Neil Peart was communicating with her using this method, and she was asking the head of security to try to help her to make this stop because it was essentially wrecking her life. She went through a divorce. Her mother, I think, also died that year. She says that some of the communications she was receiving seemed to be using her mother's voice, which is a real scary thought if you think about MK Ultra projects and mind control and the possibility for someone to essentially send messages to you using a familiar voice like that. It really trips me out to think about. So I've looked into her material with a very open mind, and she also sent me, after we did our interview on the Elisa Lam case, she sent me this video, Eye of the Remote, which essentially goes into her story again. It's a bit more polished and finished than the YouTube video, and it also includes near the end where a friend of hers comes over and they try to conduct some scientific experiments to show that something is really going on with her electromagnetic frequency, and possibly even her having implants implanted in her. We're going to touch on that a little bit later. I'll also have a link, all the links below to the research as usual, but I'll also have a link to the page where you can buy Eye of the Remote. And essentially I feel like if you watch the YouTube video, I'm also going to have a link down there, if you get through that YouTube video and you feel like you have more questions or want to dive into Solaris' story a bit deeper, you can pick up Eye of the Remote for yourself and check it out. She also sells books on Amazon, so you can look her up as an author there and see books. Most of her books specialize in this area about this new term that I'm just becoming familiar with, synthetic telepathy, which when I first heard it I was kind of like, ooh, that sounds like a term from a sci-fi movie, you know, just sounds kind of drummed up, but as you're going to see in the research today, it's very real and it's already happening, but we're going to talk about the conditions of that, and does Solaris' story kind of mash up and meet up with all that. So let's get started. First off, I have this article from the Harvard Science Review, and this was published just in 2014. I'm not really going to dive into anything specific about this article, but just know that it is a subject that universities are researching regularly. A lot of funds have been donated to specific researchers that have done some tests that have showed some promise, and I found several articles relating to the ethics of it and starting to ask questions about its implications in terms of society. Are we all going to get wired directly to the internet? What's it going to be like to have messages, you know, just coming at you? Can you control other devices with it? We're going to answer some of those questions a little bit later. There are great implications if you think of the medical community, for example, someone that may have lost a limb and potentially using thought waves and brain waves to control prosthetics. And of course, as usual, there are military implications, which is going to take us to our next link here. Army developing synthetic telepathy. Similar technology marketed as a way to control video games by thought. I can also let you know that the company that I worked for previously, which I also sold some invention ideas and I have some patents with, I know for a fact that they are also looking into this technology essentially for controlling what you watch on television. Like if you go to your cable guide and you're flipping through channels, they want to make it so that you can do all that just with thoughts instead of reaching for a remote and doing it. But even when I heard that, I was just like, man, the implications around that. Is it really that hard for me to hold the remote? Do I really want my thought waves to start to be analyzed in that way? Because that opens the door to what comes next, which will be, okay, well, we're going to start picking your shows for you because we're going to analyze your thought patterns, and we can have you set a little slider where you say, do you want to be happy, or do you want drama, or do you want some action? And then based on that slider, we're going to pick the show that matches you best, and it's just going to pop on your screen. Essentially, there is a thought process that I think is going to be gripped away from us and controlled by other people, and whatever that happens, I think we need to scrutinize it highly and make sure that it's in the best interest for everyone involved. So the military is thinking about using it, and their main application for it, at least in terms of this article, and this is an older article, this is actually back from 2008, their immediate application is just for person-to-person communication, essentially being able to send an email to another person using only your thoughts. Now, an important factor around all this is there's still a device that needs to interpret the brain, the electricity that's firing in your brain, essentially. And they're doing that using EEG, which is a standard medical, used to be a medical test. I think it's still used because of how cheap it is. And basically they can measure brain waves, and they can kind of detect when certain areas of the brain are firing. So once they're able to detect that, then it's a matter of training the user to control their brain to make it fire in a specific way so that they can pass some type of functionality to that device and For instance, they can start picking letters for typing out their email, tell it to be sent, tell it who to send it to. And then there's the flip side where someone else needs to be wearing a device also that is going to give them prompts, letting them know that a message is coming in. And from the research I did today, that already exists. It's already working. There's universities that have done person-to-person communication. There's even one test I saw where they had connected a person's brain to a rat's brain, and they were able to make the rat's tail move, they say, with 97% accuracy. Accuracy seems to be a bit all over the place on this. On some of the tests I'm seeing, it's like 70%, which I'm like, 70%? I mean, once you're getting that close to 50, I'm really starting to wonder about the tech. But most of the time I'm seeing around an 80% accuracy rating for these kind of early tests, at least in terms of this official information that's being released about this type of technology. And actually, just worth mentioning, whenever I bring up angles on technology, a lot of viewers and commenters will come back and say, yeah, John, but don't you think that there is better stuff being developed specifically for the military that the public may not be aware of? And yes and no. I do think that there is a certain limited amount of time when a company might have a specific vision and the resources to execute that vision, and perhaps they can squeeze off making a technology and trying to keep it contained for a small window of time. I'm talking maybe a couple of years nowadays. I believe that's getting narrower and narrower for two reasons. Number one, anyone that has worked in terms of patents or inventions, you quickly learn that people are coming up with the same ideas all the time, everywhere. Basically, what the patent system does and why it was necessary to be engineered that way is so that supposedly the first person to come up with the idea could tag it as ownership of, hey, I was the one that came up with this first. But if you look into patents at all, just do a little research on that, you will find that people constantly essentially create the same technology. And the second factor is the Kickstarter factor nowadays. As you can see in these articles, they're talking about the primary use being military, but right behind that is video games. Well, in which application do you think they're really going to make more money? I'm sure per unit you could charge the heck out of the military if you had these mind tap devices, and especially for that first couple year window I'm talking about, you might get 3-4 times the value of what that device is actually worth. But when you consider about the mass appeal of selling that same technology to a huge worldwide market like video games, all of a sudden that balance starts to tip. And nowadays we have the Kickstarter factor, which is essentially, if I've got two inventors, one of them's a secret military guy and he's not telling anyone what he's working on, and this guy's out in the public, but they both think of the same thing and start developing it the same way, this guy before might have been screwed because of funding. Now that's not the case anymore. Now he can go on Kickstarter if he's smart enough and has a good approach about his subject. He can share it with the world, and all of a sudden money comes to him and he can keep developing on it. So that is changing things now. I've seen a couple of products that have actually brain connection interface products that have been very successful on Kickstarter. This is just popping up all over the place, particularly with toys. So once again, you think about these implications. Military, yes, there's a big punch of money to happen very early in the lifespan of this product. But if you look at the overall lifespan of this product, there is a lot more money to be made in terms of toys and video games because of how radically huge that market is compared to a military-only market. Another article, this is from defense1.com. This was written September 2nd, 2014. Actual telepathy is one step closer to the battlefield. And here you can kind of see a headset he's wearing, and you'll see these little dots on it. Those are the actual receivers to track the information that's going on within the brain. And essentially the more receivers you put on a person's scalp, and the better that they're contacted to their scalp, the better the information they can get that's going on within your brain. So a lot of these devices have some type of head strap. We're going to get into the existing toys a little bit later, but something I found that's really cool in this article is the University of Wisconsin has a researcher named Adam Wilson who in April of 2009 used EEG to send a tweet. Here's a picture of it right here, using EEG to send tweet. He did state that you have to press a button 4 times to get the character you want, so this is kind of a slow process at first. Once again, it's not essentially like it's reading your brain and you can just think up a sentence and all of a sudden the sentence spills on the screen. There's an interface trick that you have to learn about what you do in your brain to get it to happen on screen. But a tweet has already been sent using this technology. So this is where I was thinking, okay, well, if this technology is already being used like that, there's got to be toys for it, right? And I had this little tickle in the back of my brain. I thought that there was a Star Wars toy that was already, it was like a headset you would wear and a base that had a column that had a little ball in it, and if you thought the right way, you could get the ball to levitate using a little fan that was blowing air under this foam ball. And I found this article at Scientific American. This is back from 2012. 6 electronic devices you can control with your thoughts. And the first one on it, the Star Wars Science Force Trainer, which is only $35 according to this article. I'm sure it's even cheaper now. It's been out for several years. There's also a Mattel game called MindFlex, the MindFlex Dual, Neural Impulse Actuator. And then you get into these Mindsets, which is now a Bluetooth headset that has an open API to it. So if you're a programmer, it gives you all the hardware and open accessibility to the software, so then you can write an interface to make it do anything. If you want to have a thought that brings up your web browser, you can do that. Maybe if you wanted, if you could type a tweet, you might even be able to write an interface that allows you to type a web address, and all of a sudden now you're cruising the internet using only brain instead of all that pesky movement from your mouse hand. So in one way, I know I'm being a little facetious with it, in one way it's pretty exciting to me because these are literally, at least in terms of the consumer market, these are kind of baby steps needed to get to those next layers of, thinking something thinking a whole sentence and having that sentence spill right out. One company that ran a Kickstarter has a remote-controlled helicopter and with a headset, and basically you're able to fly the helicopter with the headset. Now, from the examples I've seen, it's not like you can fly it and control it and make it go left, right, up, down, forward, and backward. Most of these devices are doing a very simple binary type response. You can make it go up, you can make it go down, and that's about it. But as the receivers get better, as people use the technology more, and there are more and more inventors looking at how to implement it, I believe we're going to see some good progress in terms of training essentially the skull piece to receive input and relay it faster to the device. There was this program called Dragon Naturally Speaking that was kind of brought up in this conversation, and I don't know if you remember that, but from the early days of voice capture, there'd be someone that instead of typing on a keyboard in Microsoft Word, if you were a horrible typist, you could get this Dragon Naturally Speaking software package, put on a headset, and you had to train it. And then once you trained it, you would be able to speak right into the headset and it would just spill right out on the page as if you were typing it basically as fast as you could speak. I think there's a very important component there where they need to get that software in place where you can essentially train the headset for my specific thoughts that I want to use to make the helicopter go up, down, and then hopefully you can get more thoughts going to make it go forward, left, right, all that good stuff. But as you can see, in terms of the consumer market, it is on one side of this equation, it's available. There is usually a physical device that needs to be connected to the person. So if we're going back to Solaris's story, this is quite a bit different than a pure psychic connection that is happening just person to person. She believes that Rush might have bought some type of older technology and they're experimenting with it and using it in essence to conduct surveillance on family members, to conduct surveillance on superfans, and she felt like she was being abused using that technology. She felt like it so much that that's why she reached out to the head of security, and essentially the head of security, it's really interesting here. He actually gave her Neil Peart's email address and said, let us know what's going on with this tech and contact us, and she did. And then all of a sudden they weren't replying, they weren't saying anything back to her, and it's almost like when they got enough of that email, I think she was hit with a restraining order, and she went and tried to defend the restraining order. Of course, no one listened to her side of the story, and it was left in place, but I believe it is now lapsed and expired. She has been able to overcome this using her own personal development. She's really into running, she's into martial arts, she has retooled her life. I believe she's moved a few times, and apparently now it is not affecting her in the same way. I'm not sure if it's not affecting her totally, but she's got it to at least where things are manageable and controllable for her. But she is still sharing the information very openly and trying to bring others to be aware of this. Now, one part at the end of the video, which I've mentioned a little bit before, she has someone bring some scientific instruments. I think I saw even a Geiger counter in there at one point. But I was kind of thrown, and I'm trying to stay open-minded to this like I do with everything that I look at. But I was really thrown when I saw him using a stud finder. Essentially, a stud finder is something you could buy at any Home Depot. The one that he was using was from Stanley, and you could use it on a wall to detect where the studs are in the wall. Like if you're hanging a picture and you want to make sure to get a good solid nail in there, you use the stud finder and it'll tell you where the stud is, which is a wood stud that is behind the wall. He was using this on her body, and at first I just had this reaction of like, are you kidding me? A stud finder? What the heck? Who's to say that it wouldn't ring true on anyone's body? And that's one little shortcoming about the video, is that there was no control person. I really wish that they would have showed the stud finder being used on someone that wasn't having these experiences, particularly in the same places that it detected a stud, as it did when they were doing it on Solaris. And there were several points on her body where the stud detector went off. I did some research on this. It's really not easy to find any research about using stud finders on people. However, Mythbusters did it, I believe in their 2003 series. The myth was, when going to donate blood at the Red Cross, people are actually secretly having mind-controlling microchips implanted in their bloodstream that can be detected with a stud finder. And the notes on it, first of all, the status is busted, but not for the reason you'd think. The notes on it are, while a stud finder can find microchips, like those used to track pets, embedded in flesh, none were found after the pair donated blood at the Red Cross. So believe it or not, stud finder being used on a person, not so wacky. How does it fit in with Solaris' story? I'm not sure, because as I mentioned, she was looking at it from it being a purely psychic connection. But if he's saying he found chips, were they possibly implanted in her at some point? If she had undergone some medical procedure or something, and did that enable the communication? Because from all the research I've done, you need to have some version of localized hardware to process the EEG information. Or is this technology that is not available publicly, like I said before, and we do have some type of black box secret lab technology that is being used there? I'm really not sure. I know this is a controversial subject. If you look at her ratings on Amazon for her books, it's very interesting. People either love her or they completely dismiss her. It's like everything is 5s or 1s. Interestingly enough, her fives seem to be the majority of the votes most of the time, and if you look at the comments that are only 1 star, it's pretty much people dismissing her, thinking that she's having some type of emotional disorder or something like that. Personally, I'm of the mind that something is going on here. I don't really know if it's related to Rush, and I'll tell you, remember that part before where I told you she recognized that they were using her dead mother's voice to send messages? That's what kind of gripped me originally when I watched the very first video about this whole thing from her. What if this technology that's being used is essentially enacting parts of her brain that are triggering her to think that it is communication from those people? I don't know if she was a Rush fan before, but for someone like me, like I'm a huge U2 fan, if all of a sudden someone was manipulating me and using Bono's voice or something like that, that would really be a lot closer to being able to manipulate me than, for instance, using the voice of a band that I don't like or I'm not familiar with or something like that. So I'm almost wondering if there is some system that's built in here where they can access certain parts of your recall, and maybe not even know it. They might not even know what voice they're using, but they're just picking, you know, a influential voice from your past and go ahead and post this message to that person using that voice. That seems, first of all, in terms of being dangerous and convincing people, that seems like a way that is a bit stronger than even using your own voice, like if I was the person at the other end of the microphone trying to send the message. So in any case, I found it really intriguing. I liked both videos in terms of being brain scratchers. They definitely got my brain going and kind of made me think about things a little bit. And if you approach the subject with an open mind and do a little research, I think you're really going to be surprised at the feasibility of it. It's for the points that I tried to discount, I just bumped into information that was basically supporting the possibility that this could be happening. So I look forward to all your thoughts and comments, and I want to thank Solaris for sending me a copy of Eye of the Remote so I could check it out for myself. There she is on the back. And if you're interested, links below so you can pick that up. And also check out her show, The Witching Hour, which had an incredible segment on Elisa Lam, featuring yours truly. But honestly, it's a good show. She's a really good host, and they're always looking into the unexplained, treading much more into the paranormal than typical brain scratch content, but I know there's a lot of people that really like that stuff out there. I hope that you enjoyed this edition. Please leave your thoughts and comments below, any links to other information that I can check out that you think can either support or refute this story. I'm looking forward to digging into it deeper. Might do a follow-up on it if you guys send enough info, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I will catch you next week on Geek and Dorks, a YouTube channel. Take care.